Hello and welcome back, and that is right. Today we're going to be looking at three very serious and very data center hard drives. We're looking at three different drives that a number of you, whether you're utilizing network attached storage or large scale kind of rack mount SAN environments, are considering for different storage solutions, and hopefully help you understand the differences between them. So in today's video we're looking at the Synology HAT5300, their own branded drive. This is their enterprise grade drive. It's originally a Toshiba drive with some Synology firmware on board. We've also got the Western Digital Ultrastar series, and again, although the Ultrastar series does span off into multiple different sub categories and sub models that we'll talk about later on, we're going to be looking at Ultrastar as a whole and talking about any small differences later in the video. And finally, much of the same ilk, we have got the Seagate EXOs series. Once again, with different variants and different X's and E versions out there, but we are looking at the EXOs series as a whole with a few key model component universal selling points that we'll talk about, and unique selling points even on that drive. So let's crack on, shall we? All three of these drives realistically are going to be great inside a data center environment, enterprise, even just a standard 12 or 18 bay rack mount there. They're all great drives with a high level of performance behind them, particularly workload utilization and sustained performance. And sustained performance is what's key here. Earlier on last month, I talked about looking at Pro series drives. We looked at the Red Pro, the Ironwolf Pro, and once again, the Synology drive there. Now, the difference between an enterprise grade drive and a Pro series drive is simply that word, endurance, and indeed sustained performance under endurance. Now, all three of these are very, very similar indeed. They've all got one big thing in common, so they've got a whole range, I should say, of all things in common, being data center class drives. They've all got a kind of active vibration and balance mechanic built into the many, many platters. They both arrive in a multitude of different platter volumes, and although the Synology is available in the fewest number of capacities that I'll talk about later on, they all still take advantage of high volume platters as well, with the Seagate and the WD going as high as 9 platters all within that single device. A platter, of course, is that cylindrical disc there in the middle that's being read by this arm at the bottom. And again, regardless of the number of the platters that you have, the larger storage capacity you've got, the larger storage is going to be needed for each of those platters. So at that point, you really are pushing the boundary into a high working drive environment there. Again, hence why all of these are very much destined for that data center or high volume rack mount utilization. They all take advantage of PMR or CMR level recording, perpendicular magnetic recording or conventional magnetic recording. It should be highlighted, however, that the Seagate and WD drives, as they've gone into those larger capacities, once again we'll talk about that later on, utilize other methods as well, such as heat-assisted magnetic recording, or HAMR, or EAMR, energy-assisted magnetic recording, and both of these subdivide into MAMR and EAMR. There's lots of different variants being broken into, all of which are the result of further improvements in getting as much data as possible on those individual platters, once again cracking into the higher volumes. And although the Synology drive is an original Toshiba drive with Synology firmware on board, it's worth highlighting that Toshiba are in the process of cracking the 18 and 20 TB mark very, very soon, commercially, although already at the data center class level as well. Now, all of them arrive with 5 years of manufacturer's warranty there, and all three of them arrive with a workload rating of 550 terabytes there. Now, what does that mean? Well, 550 terabytes per year means you can write 550 terabytes onto these drives in a year absolutely fine. And again, in a 5-year warranty, times it by 5, and that is your overall workload on there. So other things like MTBF, or mean time between failure, is pretty similar, with all of them arriving somewhere between the 1.8 and the 2.5 million hours there. And again, all three of them also arrive with SAS variants as well, not just SATA, what we're seeing here on screen. We've also got that option of SAS connectivity, which, although does provide the SAS connector at least the opportunity for a much faster bandwidth, it's worth remembering that all three of these drives are still mechanical hard drives. They still require platters and an ARM there, and ultimately are very rarely going to crack that high. Although I will say that of the three of them, when it comes to the highest performance out there, the Seagate and the WD are the ones getting the highest performance there, both of which bring in a different methodology to the fold to allow them to get ever closer and indeed exceed half of the available bandwidth available via a SATA connection. Whereas the Synology drive there, the HA5300 and indeed the HAS SAS version, cap out around about 282 megabytes per second read transfer rate in there. So again, fantastically enterprise drives between the three of them. We've talked about what they've got in common. Let's start talking about what they've got that's different. And the first thing to touch on, of course, is capacity. Because the way these three brands have approached capacity, once upon a time would have been very, very similar. But now things have diverted quite substantially. Straight up off the bat, I've already highlighted it earlier on. The Synology drive there, the original Toshiba MG series there, with the firmware on board from Synology, is currently at the time of recording only available in 4 different capacities: a 4 TB, an 8 TB, a 12 TB and a 16 TB. They've come under fire a little bit for not having a wider arrangement of capacities available. It should be mentioned, I'm sure they're rolling more capacities out over time, but a number of users out there like to go for a larger number of drives, lower capacity, or vice versa in their configurations. And having only 4 capacities capping out at 16 TB is less than ideal in 2022 for a number of users. Now, if we move along to the table, we can talk about the Ultrastar series. Now, WD and Seagate have had a very odd relationship when it's come to providing hard drives for both consumers and business users. A relationship that has weirdly reversed in the last 18 to 24 months. Now, 18 to 24 months ago, if we rewind time a little bit, it should be highlighted that WD at that point were kind of falling behind. Their drives cost more than their biggest opponent, Seagate, and at the same time, they weren't really providing the bigger capacities. At that point, only really offering the 14 and kind of semi-promising the 16 TBs on the horizon there, whereas Seagate had already released a 16 TB drive and indeed were already alluding to their roadmap and the road towards 18 and 20 TB coming very, very soon. Now, at that point, WD seemed to like people were thinking they were just sitting on their laurels a little bit. But fast forward to now, and WD, and in particular the Ultrastar series, is now available in up to 22 terabytes, something that Seagate have yet to commercially release. That whole tortoise and the hare thing with Ultrastar now exceeding Seagate in the largest capacity commercially available right now. So again, the Ultrastar series is available up to 22 TB and it's available in as little as 1 TB. So 1, 2, 4, 6, 8, all the benchmarks and all the little checkpoints you would expect across the entire gamut available in the Ultrastar series. And that spans across a number of different model IDs as well in the HC series there, covering 510, 530 and 560 within the Ultrastar branding. Now, Seagate, very, very close indeed. I will say the Seagate drive's currently commercially available at 20 TB, with some partners being offered access or early access and enterprise level data center customers getting access to the 22 TBs. But with both of these two brands revealing their roadmap and annual earnings calls talking about larger capacities, I don't think it's going to be very, very long. Maybe by the time you're watching this, that Seagate have rolled out the 22 TBs with the 24 TBs landing very, very quickly afterwards. So again, they've got all of the capacities from 1 TB all the way through to 20. So when it comes to currently at the time of recording, who's got the largest capacity, it's going to be the Ultrastar. And which brand's got the most available capacities? Once again, it's going to be the Ultrastar. So that's a solid win right now for Ultrastar and WD as far as available capacities go. But let's be realistic. Having the amount of storage available to you just simply is not it. And you want to know, how much is it going to cost you? What's the damage? And between the three of these, I've got to say, the Synology one there on the end, the HAT5300, yes, it is designed for Synology-only environments, and therefore the firmware on board is designed to work in tandem with the Synology system, something we'll talk about later on. It should be highlighted that of the three, that one is by far the most expensive there. Now, I looked at 3 different retailers, one in one in the US, one in the UK and one in Germany. Now the calculation for this was as follows. I took the largest available capacity drive from either of these three manufacturers, then I took the price tag of that drive and then divided it by the number of terabytes. So in the case of the Synology, I took the 16 TB drive, the price tag of the 16 TB drive, and divided by 16 to get our price per terabyte. Now, the Synology HAT5300 retails on Newegg for the US at $39 a terabyte, on Scan over here in the UK at £38 per terabyte, and in Amazon Germany or Amazon.de it was €46.81. And again, by a good margin, the most expensive drive of the three. The Ultrastar there arrived in, as far as Newegg in the US are concerned, based on the 20 TB drive, because the 22 TB drive didn't have full availability everywhere. The 20 TB drive was $22.45. In the UK money at Scan it was £19.70, and in Amazon.de it was €21.25. A huge improvement in price over that of the Synology, and a real surprising change given that the Ultrastar series is the longest running brand of the three of them there. As far as data center is concerned, I kind of expected it to try and maximize that profit point there and its reputation and leverage a bit more bunts out of people. Now the Seagate EXOS series there, I would argue of the three of them was the most interesting pricing, because it was by no means as expensive as the Synology, but with their larger ranges and things like the Mac series, Mac 2 series to take into consideration, and the fact they've got the X and the E and the XE series as well, and the 2XE, I kind of expected it to be a lot more expensive than it was. And although it kind of traded blows in terms of pricing with the Ultrastar, it still wasn't as expensive as I expected. So in far as the US is concerned, and with Newegg, it was $21.49 per terabyte, and this is based on the 20 TB. In the case of the UK and Scan, it was £22.19, and in Amazon.de, €26.25. So again, it was cheaper in the US, but the Ultrastar was cheaper in the UK and Germany there. And in all three cases, unfortunately, the Synology drive was the more expensive, something that we're really finding quite odd, because they arrived on the scene at such a compelling price. Now, you can get deals at some retailers, but they're very fleeting, and the price, there isn't really a consistent price point for Synology drives that I would have liked to have seen when compared to the Seagate or the WD. Now, one might argue these companies are billions of dollars of value. I think they're between $7 and $10 billion companies. They have the elasticity, they have the range of hardware, they have the buying power and the selling power in order to get that better price point. And Synology already are repurposing existing Toshiba MG drives. It's very hard for them to get that price point anywhere near as low as this, but still, there's no arguing with it that on points, the Ultrastar won just by a hair's breadth over the Seagate, but these two drives were still by far the more affordable of the three. Now, I mentioned unique selling points earlier on. It's worth highlighting that all three of these drives do bring something a little bit different to the party. Similar, but different enough that it's worth highlighting. Now, in the case of the Synology, I already touched on it, but I should mention it again. If you go for a Synology hard drive in a Synology system, it does open up a few extra features within the storage manager there. One of which, of course, is the most interesting, the firmware update option. Anyone that's ever used a multi-drive environment within a server will know that updating the firmware on drives can be tough. And unless you are using a very bare bones system that has, BIOS level access at the touch of a button, updating the firmware on a hard drive can be very, very difficult, and particularly one that exists within a RAID array. The Synology system, on the other hand, gives you the ability from within DSM to update the firmware on that drive from without having to shut down the system, remove drives, put them in a dock, update them, move back and forth, which is a really useful feature. On top of that, the Synology hard drive is running firmware that is designed for like enterprise-grade systems in like the XS and the SA series and more. So consequently, it knows the system it's going to be running in more than anything. No one's going to take these drives and put them in like a QNAP or nothing. So the firmware inside the Synology drive can be a little bit more catered to the end usage, whereas these two drives here, they need to be just the tiniest bit balanced. They can design their firmware around a generic 24/7 constant access environment, sure, but they're not going to be able to tailor in the direction of maybe an EMC or a NetApp or an HP or a Synology or a QNAP or a TrueNAS. They've got to remain a little bit more middle ground. It's something the Synology drive doesn't need to have. So with that firmware updates and a better client system design, that might be beneficial to a Synology NAS user who is looking at enterprise grade media for their NAS. Now, the WD drives, on the other hand, I mentioned earlier on that all three of these drives arrive in SAS-based versions, but I will argue that the Seagate and the WD bring a little extra something to the party. Alongside that improved magnetic recording techniques for those larger capacities, the WD drive or the Ultrastar drive arrives with different levels of encryption option. So if you choose to, you can get the drive pre-encrypted to a military grade standard, which a lot of businesses insist upon for the storage within their environment, insofar as if a drive is stolen or an encrypted system, an encrypted whole server system is stolen or misappropriated in one way or another, all the drives are deleted, and you need to make sure drive data cannot be retrieved accurately for the sake of confidentiality. A lot of users are going to be finding this encrypted backend on these drives a great deal more appealing. Now, in the case of the Seagate, I've touched on it earlier on, one of its unique selling points, alongside different recording techniques and encryption, much the same method, but this drive also arrives with that MAC2. Now, MAC2, for those that aren't aware, going back to our little dummy drive over here, is when you see this little arm here that reads the drive. The MAC2 series of drives has two of these inside, and these two little arms inside are reading together, effectively doubling the performance, with some MAC2 drives rating, and this is a mechanical hard drive, at around 400 to 440 megabytes per second. It's a greedy little drive, but that is patented. That is something only Seagate can offer you in terms of its design and lineup. So again, that is the unique selling point of these three drives, and I can't really give one an advantage over the other because it ultimately comes down to what you are looking for in a drive. Now, what about noise? We've talked about noise before, haven't we? Enterprise grade hard drives, as appealing as they can be for users that look at the larger capacities and wonder, hang on, why is the enterprise drive lower in price than the Pro drive if the enterprise drive's better? One of the many reasons, and I'm going to be covering it in a separate video, is noise. Enterprise grade drive noise are designed to be hugely industrial, to have fast spin up and spin down, fast access times, but ultimately are designed more ruggedly to last for extended periods of time, of sustained utilization and just lifespan. Consequently, those larger degree of more industrial components lead to a drive that is way noisier. And in the case of all three of these drives, they are noisier than your average drive out there. So what we're going to do now is take these three drives, we're going to set ourselves up a Synology, and we're going to do some quick noise testing, as well as comparing the noise these make next to a bog standard 4TB drive. Let's go. Okay, so we've installed all three of our drives that we had here on the table inside this, the DS920 Plus. We've also installed a fairly basic 4TB drive in the first bay to give ourselves a sense of relativity. Now, once again, I'm well aware that the drives we're utilising for this video do differ in capacity. Unfortunately, once again, I did not have all of the parity across the board in terms of available hard drives for each of them. So there is a measure of difference, of course, in terms of capacity. But if you do look at the decibel readings on most of these websites, when it comes to anything above 12 TB and 14 TB, the lines are pretty much drawn the same due to the number of platters being used. But for now, while I'm talking about this, what I'm going to do to give you a base level is I'm going to make my way over to the user interface here, and what I'm going to do is go ahead and run a quick benchmark test on our bog standard 4TB drive. This is a 4TB Seagate Ironwolf 4TB drive, and right now I'm going to run the test, let it run. I've got to put the password in. I'm going to let the system make its noise, and I'm going to stay silent for around about a minute. So as you can see, not exactly earth-shatteringly noisy, is it? So what we're going to do now is cease that test there. So let's stop the test. And this time what we're going to do is run an identical test, just a very light read-write transfer benchmark there on our first disk. And our first disk, as we flick over to it, is that Synology, the HAT5300. So let's run that test. And once again, I'll be a little bit quiet for you there. 3, 2, 1. Actually, hang on, got to do the installation there. Let's go ahead, put that in. And now it begins. 3, 2, 1. So now I'm stopping the test. As you can see, there's a distinct difference there between the two of them. So we needed that sense of objectivity and difference there. So what we're going to do now is set up a decibel recording meter and restart those tests there to give you some idea of a realistic measurement between them all. Okay, so let's begin our first test, and this one is going to be the Synology HAT5300. Starting in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and go. I think that's just about enough of that. Okay, so how about we try our next drive? And that is of course going to be the Ultrastar. Let's get ready. Starting this test in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and go. And that's enough of that. To my mind, that was the tiniest pinch quieter, but I'll have to check the stats afterwards. But for now, let's move on to our third and final disk, the Seagate EXOS. Let's get set up. Getting the password stuff ready there in the background. Going to run the test. And go ahead, click next. Go ahead, and 3, 2, 1, go. Ending that test there. I think we can comfortably say that the Seagate was by far the noisiest of the three of them. But let's wrap things up. And there you have it. This kind of concludes this video about comparing these three drives. What have we talked about? What have we learned? And how can we summarise in choosing between them? Who is the intended client or customer for these drives? Well, first up, the Synology. The Synology drive, unsurprisingly, is probably the best drive for a Synology, notwithstanding it having better features and design that lead towards Synology's own DSM platform, currently in DSM 7.1. That firmware update option is going to be hugely beneficial the minute you go towards the larger array. Synology's own HD6500 60-bay rack mount archival unit, when it comes to updating firmware on drives, as you introduce more drives into a recycled data environment over the years, updating firmware that easily is going to be hugely appealing. And with those drives running at their best in a Synology environment, it stands to reason that the unique buyer for that and the most appealing buyer to these drives is a Synology committed user that wants to live within that ecostructure. Now, when it comes to all three of them, the Ultrastar series is the one I would say for the best diversity within its range. Notwithstanding, you've got those SAS options and SATA options like the others, and you've got multi-level encryption options as well. You know, much like the same as Seagate, you've also got bigger capacities available in the Ultrastar series as well. And on top of that, Ultrastar isn't where it ends. Ultrastar also runs parallel to the WD Gold series of drives, another enterprise grade drive. So again, WD, and not just their Ultrastar, but WD as a whole, is definitely the choice for the better various range and different drives available to you, the end user, who are looking at enterprise class drives for your rack mount system. There's a tremendous amount to choose from in terms of capacity and features of drives, scaling quite well in terms of pricing and durability as you make your way through the individual ranges. Now, in terms of Seagate, who it's aimed at, once upon a time, I would have said price. There was a time when Seagate drives were the best value for money ones on the market. With the enterprise grade drives, things have kind of leveled out. Maybe it's because of the cost of hardware right now in 2022, but I would recommend them for speed. Not only because of the speed of things like Mac 2, bringing that great 2-arm actuator access, hugely improving and doing a great job of attempting to saturate SATA on a hard drive. But on top of that, things like the transfer rates being rated just higher in most cases per capacity in both the Seagate EXOS series and the Pro series as well. There's even the Nitro series and other drives in the SSDs, which, like for like versus other brands, Seagate tends to hit that performance number higher than anyone else. So once again, for dedicated Synology ecosystems for the best range and diversity of solutions in their portfolio, and for performance, speed and transfer rates overall there at the end. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I'm pleased I didn't knock any of these drives over. Did you think I would? I certainly did. If you want to learn more, click subscribe. We've got more videos on this, as well as a video dedicated to what is the main difference between a data center drive and a Pro Series drive, coming very, very soon. Stay tuned for that. Click like if you've enjoyed the video. It helps me understand what I'm doing right and wrong. And other than that, I will see you next time.